number of Republicans them to be distinctive is their roles as caregivers in the family. They talk a lot about being moms and what being moms brings to the table. And they also talk about their caregiving roles in the community and work outside the family as well. Also important is this statement where she talks about the interest in protecting the most vulnerable. One of the things that we heard over and over from a lot of the women is that they really feel that they are in Congress, that they're there. One of their responsibilities is to, while they're there, is to look out for people who otherwise are not represented within the halls of Congress. People who are, to be, I guess you would call it a voice for the voiceless, to represent people, whether they be economically disadvantaged, whether they be disabled, whether they be gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, whether they be, in some cases with Republican women, children. They talked about children a lot. And in some cases with some of the Republican women, they talked about representing the unborn in this kind of a context. We also asked the not just the African American women, but the women of color, if they had an agenda which was different from their white women colleagues, and they kind of pushed back at us on this question a bit, and said they not so much had a different agenda as that they had a more expansive agenda and some different perspectives to bring to bear to the work in Congress than the white women did. So Barbara Lee reflects this in this comment. She says, okay, so we have our agenda, which is very similar to women, all women, but then on top of that, we have the unique perspective that we bring coming from the African American experience. I want to talk about one example of sort of policy example where women made some change in the 114th Congress, and this is probably my favorite example from this particular session of Congress. You know, not much happened in the 114th Congress because of partisan gridlock on the big issues, the ones that got all the headlines in the media. But there were a lot of smaller, less sensational perhaps, less media, worthy stories, or stories that didn't get the big, at least the big headlines that happened, and legislation that passed regarding these things. One of these had to do with these women who were Air Force service pilots back in World War II. And basically, they had been able to have their remains buried in Arlington Cemetery, but Arlington Cemetery is overseen by the Secretary of the Army. And the Secretary of Army realized that they were running out of space to bury people at Arlington Cemetery. And so he made a decision, an executive decision, that these women who served as service pilots in World War II could no longer be buried there. Their remains could no longer be buried there. Well, she was the representative then, now she's in the Senate, but Representative Martha McSally got word of this, heard about this, and Martha McSally was the first female fighter pilot in the Air Force to fly in combat. And she was quite outraged at this decision, and she approached her colleague in the Senate, Joanie Ernst, who was not a fighter pilot, but who was a veteran, who had been in the military. And together, they got together and they sponsored legislation in Congress to overturn this decision by the Secretary of the Army. They were successful in doing so. They enlisted some of their Democratic women colleagues to help in this effort. And in a bipartisan effort, they were able to get legislation passed so that the remains of these women service pilots, there aren't a lot of them left, but the ones who were left can now have their remains buried in Arlington Cemetery. Okay, in terms of the second way that we might look for women to make a difference in Congress, I want to talk about their work style and what these women we interviewed in the 114th Congress had to say about the work style of the women. And in interview after interview, almost every woman we interviewed, and at one point or another in the interview, said something related to the fact that they felt that women were different than men in the way they approached their work, that they were motivated differently, that they were more results-oriented and less concerned about getting credit for their work or getting the media headlines. Kirsten Gillibrand, again, said, "We are often less concerned with credit, less concerned with partisan politics, less concerned with ideology, and more focused on how you get something done in solving a problem." Similarly, Senator Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin said, "More women go into politics to get something done, to solve a problem, to fix something than men do. Very few of my female colleagues got into politics because they just wanted to be a U.S. senator. We're not there for the power of politics." So these women really see themselves as more oriented than men are towards problem solving in their work in Congress. They also see themselves, many of them, as more collaborative in the way they go about their work. This is reflected by the statement by Senator Susan Collins, who says, "I think women tend to be more collaborative, but I want to dispel the notion that somehow we think alike or that we share the same political views. Just as the men in the Senate span the ideological spectrum, so do the women. But I do believe the style of the women senators is more collaborative." Well, does more collaborative mean that they're more bipartisan? That's an interesting question, I think. And while some of the women did not think women were more bipartisan than men were, that the two genders were equally likely to try to work across the aisle or to not try to work across the aisle, a majority of the women actually argued that, in fact, women were more bipartisan in their approach, more likely to work across the aisle. And these two pictures reflect a couple of reasons why that might be the case, because of the relationships that they form. The first picture there is the women's softball team, the congressional softball team. Now, you probably know that the men in Congress, because of the shooting, that the men in Congress play an annual softball game to raise money for charity, and the men in Congress play the Republicans versus the Democrats. It's a partisan game for them. The women in Congress also play a softball game to raise money for charity, but the women all play on the same team. They play against the women in the press, women in the media. And so what happens then is they get together, they practice together, they play this game together, they build relationships, they get to know people who are on the other side of the aisle. And in this picture, they're both Republicans and Democrats. And this forges relationships which can then be used when it comes to policy, when they're thinking about policy and looking for somebody across the aisle to maybe co-sponsor policy with them. The other picture is a picture of women in the Senate, and you can see at the center of that picture Barbara Mikulski, who is truly was the dean of women in the Senate. She recently retired, but she served there long before the other women who've come in. And as the other women came in, when she first came into Congress, I think there was one other woman. And as other women came into Congress, she organized these dinners where she got all the women in the Senate, women in the Senate together for these dinners. And these were not dinners where they hashed out policy or talked about policy differences or legislation. Rather, these were the kind of dinners you might have with your buddies, with your friends, where they would share stories about their lives and talk about their families and probably gripe about their colleagues. Who knows? But what this did was even though these were not policy-focused dinners, they brought women together in a way that they got to know each other, to build relationships, and some of these relationships, in fact, did result in, over time, have resulted in co-sponsorship of legislation or working on different legislative items together. I just want to give one quick example from the Congress we studied of women working together across partisan lines. This is a picture of Representative Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee, who's now in the Senate, has been elected to the Senate. She's one of the most conservative women in Congress. and Carolyn Maloney from New York, here in New York, who is one of the more liberal women in Congress. And they got together to sponsor legislation to set up a commission to study setting up on the National Mall or near the National Mall, establishing a National Women's History Museum. And they were successful in getting this legislation through Congress. The commission was set up. It reported back its findings. We still don't have a National Women's History Museum, but if we do someday have one, there's legislation pending. If we do someday have one, it will be in large part due to the efforts of these two women. Okay, and finally, women, the final third way that I want to talk about women making change is through their role as role models. These women talked over and over in these interviews about how they wanted to, they took every opportunity to reach out to go and reach out to women outside of politics to encourage them to become involved in politics and to think about running for office. Representative Jackie Walorski from Indiana said, "I think there should be more women on both sides of the aisle. Every chance I have, whether I'm speaking to girls in high school or civic groups, speaking to women, moms, I'm always talking about the need for more women to get involved." And I would say that, I would point out that the way she talks about encouraging women on both sides of the aisles, this was true of these women. The women who are Democrats want more Republican women there as well as more Democratic women, and the Republican women want more Democratic women there as well as Republican women, because they know when their party's out of power, they want women there who can have access to leadership or be in leadership on the other side and bring perspectives, the gender-related perspectives to bear. And also, they reach out to girls. They feel it's important to reach out to girls to serve as role models for them. Joyce Beatty from Ohio here says, "Having more women of color in Congress makes a difference when little African-American girls can dream that they too can serve in Congress." And finally, this quote from Representative Donna Edwards, who brings a couple of the different things from this talk together when she says, "When women are really part of the discussion and the decision-making, our voices are distinct, but we're just not to scale. There's just not enough of us, period." And I just want to end my comments by saying that even though we've had record numbers of women elected to Congress in 2018, we still have women still are only 1/4 of the members of Congress. We're still nowhere close to parity, so there's still a lot of work to be done. And I hope you all will join me in helping to continue the work and move us closer to parity. Thank you.
Okay, now what happens? First, I assume I get to thank Sue, right? That's the first thing. And just let me put in a plug for the Center for American Women in Politics, which she's been involved with for years and years. It's definitely, if you want to know anything about women in politics in the U.S., just type capital C, capital A, capital W, capital P in your search engine, and you will get to COP, the Center for American Women in Politics, and they have just amazing amounts of stuff about women in politics. And they also do, another wonderful part of their mission is to train women, both in New Jersey and more generally, young women, but all women, to run for office and to help them figure out how to do that. So it's a great place, and it can be very useful. So what I would like to do is to use Joanie and Pam to sort of figure out the extent to which they have experienced some of the things that Sue is talking about, or whether some of the findings that Sue and her colleagues have over the years come up with, and other people studying this too, seem to resonate or seem to hold true. So a couple of these have to do with, the questions I had have to do with how women are different from men, basically. And the most recent book that Sue talked about was based on members of Congress's own perceptions, members of the recent Congress, and women. But there is research, mostly by you folks, based on state legislatures, women and men in state legislatures over longer periods of time. You got a bigger N there. And some of the findings there are that, and this is a more kind of objective look at it, I guess, are that women state legislators as compared to male state legislators are more collaborative. And I don't think it's only bipartisanship that is being talked about then. I think it's just more, they're more likely to work with other people. They're more likely to co-sponsor legislation. They're more likely not to go it alone, kind of in various political ways. That's one difference. A second difference, I believe, is that, and you can correct me if I'm misremembering this, is that women legislators got more joy out of working with constituents, tended to reach out to constituents more often, said that constituency work was a more important part of their job. And thirdly, which I really like, is that, and this seemed like a reasonable metric, women are more persistent. That is that measured by the fact that they tended to reintroduce their bills that didn't work the first time, more than men did. So I'd be interested, Joanie and Pam, how you react to those claims about differences. And these are not all men are this way, all women are, but that there is somewhat of a difference.
I'm going to defer to the Assemblywoman first.
Okay.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's interesting hearing about women being more collaborative. I think, especially at the state level, in the Assembly and just representing in Central New York, you have to understand the demographics a little bit different than maybe you would see on a grander scale in Congress. In Central New York, and we're always talking about more women and first, and I'm the only woman that represents at the state level in Central New York. And the only black female, actually, to represent at the state level in Central New York, and the only woman veteran, actually, in the whole state legislature. And so there's a way in which, when you're already walking into your first, you kind of are going in there with your arms rolled up, your sleeves rolled up, ready to say, we're going to try to, get as much done as possible, and knowing that the voice that you are speaking from and the people that you are speaking for, and maybe the people who look like me, it's few and far between, especially in Central New York. And just to kind of geographically look at that a little bit, outside of New York City, there are only 3, and not including Long Island, there are only 3 people of color that represent outside of New York City and Long Island, and that's myself and Crystal Peoples-Stokes, who's now our majority leader, and David Gant in Rochester area. So I think it brings kind of a unique perspective. So when you're talking about, collaboration, you're collaborating with people who, obviously are different than you, maybe diverse, different. The demographic is different. Obviously, they're talking about people who maybe are in a place that are much larger and don't necessarily have the same issues that we have here. So you have to be open-minded, because at the end of the day, when we're representing, it's all what we're trying to bring back to the resources to the people that I represent. And sometimes, obviously, that takes a lot of effort. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, some of the uniqueness, that are women, and maybe this doesn't go directly to her, the conversation, but I just wanted to say that we're a great group of women in the State Assembly. And, we have a lot of women actually in the State Assembly, more than we have in the State Senate. But we bring kind of different perspectives, even the other women of color who represent at the state level. It's kind of unique. But all of us are having conversations when we talk about childcare as economic development opportunities. Who's thinking of childcare as an economic development opportunity? But those are the things that women bring back. So I definitely agree with her points, but I think it's definitely more expansive in a geography like Central New York.
Okay, thank you. And I want to make sure that we thank our host, Grant, and thank the Dean for making the Campbell Institute possible, because especially on the local level, it's really, I've said it to you many times over the years, being able to have conversations rather than just a 2-minute soundbite. It's good for the community, it's good for us, it's good for local government, so thank you. I can relate to all of what you said, and I don't know how much time there is, but I'll highlight a couple. And I just want to start out by saying that I came into politics myself in the late 90s, and I didn't run for county executive till 2007, and I have apologized many times since then, because I really thought that we were past a lot of the issues that women were dealing with in politics. I thought the generation ahead of us had really paved the way and made things better. And my experience, I just hadn't collided with the right people to realize that battle still continues. But I think that it can be solved. So collaboration, yes. I think it has to do with busyness. And as you said, results oriented. We just don't have time for a lot of the games that people play. And none of the women that I worked with, and there's a couple here in the room from the Onondaga County Legislature, like, we're not there for any reason other than to accomplish something. And there's a lot of other people there in the category of men that that the whole thing seems like a game to them. It's a social club, and, you know, just scoring points and making sure the other team doesn't get, like, we just didn't, you know, we didn't always agree on things, but we didn't disagree simply because it was the wrong team or whatever. You know what I mean? So I do think it's collaborative. I don't know if it's necessarily our personalities or a factor of our busyness. Like, we're there to get something done, and we have way too much going on in our lives. And I think data will bear out the fact that our days are busier still. So that might be a factor to it. I think that the gerrymandering is a big factor, because there are so many races that are decided before Election Day that there is no rewarding camaraderie and collaboration. And I think we kind of look past it, but it's real. And if you're gonna have to pass a purity test in a primary in your district and it is red or blue, then you're not gonna be rewarded for finding ways to work across the aisle with each other. So I think that that could go a long way toward making the situation better. But then the other thing is, it's another big part of this is what you said about just the parity. We need more women. It will solve a lot of the issues. Men really stick together, and you know, they don't always seem like it, but when it comes down to it, there's a certain stick-to-itiveness that if there's something really important that they don't want you to break into, they can kind of coalesce. But there was something I was going to say on that specifically, but now I lost it. But if it comes back, I will interrupt. Oh, no, I know what I was going to say. It's still true. Even people with good intentions. We're not even talking about, like, there's bad guys, but then there's really good guys who I'll be in meetings with that will be talking about promotion, or, you know, because I had a job where we had to hire a lot of people, and you'll still hear from really good people, you know, that person's difficult, they're inevitably talking about a woman, or that person is, you know, like, they tell you like it is, and strong leader, and they're inevitably talking about a man, you know? Like, we've heard it 1,000 times, but it's still true to this day, and just by virtue of having more women in the room, it'll make it better.
One thing that reminds me of is this notion of a critical mass. And I want to ask Sue what, I know that people have actually tried to figure that out, that whether it's in a corporation or leadership group, certainly in legislatures, there is a point at which women seize power, and it's not 51% necessarily. It's a small, it can be a smaller portion, but it's somehow that you feel supported, that you, so thinking about that and thinking about, I completely understand what you're saying, but you're saying it about a body which is primarily male, right? Right. And how many more women would you have had to have before a switch was switched, where it wouldn't have happened?
Well, I would say there needs to be at least one woman in every room.
Yes,
and we're not even there
at
yet.
least.
We're not even there yet, But I would defer to Sue
Yeah,
for
Sue,
what the answer is about
isn't
a
it
critical
30% or something like that?
I don't think there's really a number.
I know, but make it up.
A lot of research has looked at this, and sort of a lot of scholars have moved away from the notion of critical mass. I think because we can't. It seems to vary so much depending on the context. So but it's clear there still are a lot of situations where I would say maybe two. Okay. Having two would help. I mean, there still are committees. There still are committees in Congress, subcommittees in Congress, where there's only, say, one woman on the subcommittee, or at least there was in the Congress we studied. Maybe it's a little better now, but, so it helps to at least have a couple, there, and obviously, just for the support, so that when someone, because there is a lot of research that isn't by political scientists that shows, and all women have kind of experienced this, where the woman in the room makes a comment and makes a suggestion, and then everybody kind of ignores it and goes on, and then 5 minutes later, a man makes the same suggestion, and everybody says, "Oh, wow, that's a great idea." And the virtue of having another woman there is the woman can then be the second person, right? Be the second person and say, I agree with what, Joan or Molly or whoever over here said, and call attention to it. So yeah, so I think it's very important to have certainly move beyond the token status.
Another question I have for Pam and Joanie is about the role model effect and sort of getting women to run for office. And the good research here talks about how women in general don't feel or are less likely to feel that they are qualified to run for office than a comparable man. I mean, so you may have looked at this stuff. It's Jennifer Fox and Richard Lawless, and they interviewed a whole bunch of people kind of that were in the career paths, like lawyers and business people, who would run for office typically. And they asked them a number of questions, but one of them was, had you ever thought about politics, and do you think you're qualified? And the results are that there's a big difference between men and women. Men and women who are equally qualified are very differently thinking about whether they might have a political career and whether they're qualified. And women also get much less as they're growing up, suggestions or, by parents or others that this might be a career for them. So what can be done by people like you all who are role models to stop that process, to switch that, to make it as equally as plausible for young women to think about political careers as men, as equally, and that women realize that they can enjoy being in politics?
I think the times actually have changed. I think that we, as were making mention in the presentation, that there's definitely been more women who've run than ever before. But if you look at even locally, I'm proud to say, in Onondaga County, within our own Democratic committee structure, we have more women running for our county legislature now than we have ever had before. And I think it's a lot of it, especially in the past couple of years, have come from the Me Too movement. A lot of it has come from seeing people who actually look like you, who are in your in your community that they say, oh, I can do that as well. If you see it on the national stage, I think definitely with President Obama, you saw somebody who was a person of color who, I can do this. If he can do it, then other people can do things too. You obviously saw, you know, the women who are running for president. You have Kamala Harris up there. I think that younger people now know that they can do it, not think that maybe somebody along the way may, you know, tap me on the shoulder. I think what really needs to be focused on is that people who are at a socioeconomic level who they think even having a stable house is out of their reach, that something like being an elected official is something they can do. And it's definitely incumbent upon myself and all others to lift them up, because that's something that they absolutely need to feel, but they can do it. They can. I think that there's this notion that you have to be a lawyer or you have to be a bank president or you have to be a whatever it is that people think that somebody's job was supposed to have been. But we've seen that you can be a waitress or a bartender, or you could have been, you know, owning a not-for-profit or home entrepreneur or a housewife and said, you know, I feel like I want to serve today because I have something to contribute to the community.
I don't think politics, I don't think that we're unique in the area of things men think they're better at. So we're talking about the political arena, but there's a lot of barriers built in along the way. I think the way boys and girls are raised generally, you'll see that lack of confidence in a lot of areas, including politics. But in politics, I think it can be made better if we can get to that critical mass, whatever it is, if we can get to the point where the tone and tenor of the conversation changes, or that we're hearing about people accomplishing things, I think it'll open the floodgates for women. I think you have to have women get in there, get that results-oriented focus. But I think a lot of the women that I personally associate with, it's not that they don't feel qualified, is they're just not interested. Like what you read about happening in Washington is not appealing. You know, do you really want to go? We're only given one life, and do you really want to spend it that way? And I really think that's kept it's kept a lot of women out of the fight, unfortunately. But I think as more get in, if we see that the tone and tenor changes, if we see the collaborative behavior that you think that it'll, you know, bear out if we get more women, the things that you said will change with more women. I think if that was portrayed in the media and women saw that that is the kind of place where you can make positive change and you can really affect your neighborhood, I think you'd see more women get in.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I also want to talk a little bit, you're talking about higher level office, and you know, people might be turned off by what's happening in Washington or can't imagine themselves. I mean, what I deal with every day is much a lower level of political office and offices. And I'm wondering first, Sue, if COP has data about 2018 or, you know, these years now as producing more women at local levels of office.
You know, we're not able to track
local
local levels of office because for a variety of reasons, there's so many of them, you know, across all
You
the
could
states.
get a big grant and get somebody to do
Gigantic.
that.
But they also hold elections at different times.
Yeah,
They're not standardized. And so what happens is the minute you count them, it's changed, right? So so we do keep tabs on women who are mayors and big cities.
Yeah.
But we've sort of given up on the notion that, you know, you can try to track. I mean, I wish somebody would, but it's probably not going to be us.
I mean,
trying to track people at the local level.
one of the things that happened after 2016 was this resistance movement, starting with the Women's March and so on, and which was powered not entirely, but largely by women, I think. And looking at through my local lens, one of the things that's done is to push a lot more women into Democratic Party politics and into running potentially for local office and into paying more attention to local, county, central New York politics. And I don't think that's something that, I know that a couple of scholars, Theda Scotchpole and Laura Putnam, are writing things about this. I don't know how data-based it is, but I really am looking forward to seeing some of those outcomes as we move forward, because I think that this experience of the last couple of years has maybe started to overcome some of the things that you're talking about, Joanie, that I couldn't get involved. Yes, I can with all my friends, and we're going to Seneca Falls, and we're marching, and then the next thing to do is we're voting this person out of office or that person into office, and the next thing, I might run for office,
Oh, and I've seen a lot more what I would call regular people
Right.
getting involved because of the
Yes.
2016 experience. I think I think that Billy Bush tape that people heard
Yeah.
was, it was just so, it doesn't matter what your political bent is. That was just so incredibly offensive that it fired a lot of people up.
Yep. Yep. Are we to the time, how are we doing?
Or if you want me to, we can open it up to questions now.
Let's see if I had any particular. I just wanted to say one thing to Sue, which is not a criticism, but I liked the women's softball team, and you were sort of attributing collaborativeness to women because they weren't playing Republicans versus Democrats, but isn't it the case that there just wasn't enough of them to play with?
There you go. Yes, you got a good point. Thank you.
Unfortunately. So we might like them to have so many, whatever. Okay.
They still will play on the same
They still will
team.
play against the press. Okay, that's just fine. I guess I'd put it to you two. Do you have anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to mention or bring up before we
Well,
throw
I'm
it to the
interested
audience?
in everyone's
Yeah.
questions, and but I would just say that my wish would be that people pay attention and that they make informed decisions when they go to vote and get involved. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to groups and I've listened to complaints about the way things are, and I've said, well, I have this impression that you're all home with a glass of wine on your patio talking about how bad it is, but like get in, get in. And I personally am willing to help. I think that there's just a simple mechanics of how you get your name on the ballot that keeps a lot of people out.
Yep.
But, call on me. I'm happy to help because I think the more people that we get involved, the better that we will all be. So I don't know if you have anything.
I just wanted to say, I think that the way the whole political government structure was set up, it wasn't set up for us women. It wasn't set up. I mean, even just having the notion that the meetings are scheduled in the middle of the day. Who has time to go to a meeting in the middle of the day? If you are a part-time legislator, just say on the county ledge or even on the city council in the city of Syracuse, not even thinking about the state legislature or Congress, you have to be self-employed. You have to have an employer that would say, yes, you can leave, work in the middle of the day, maybe be a lawyer. So it's not conducive for working women, obviously, as we're sitting here talking about women, to say, yes, I can be that too, if knowing that the structure was not set up for working women or women because you were home taking care of the kids. You didn't have time to come home and, leave to go, for a meeting in the middle of the day. And I think those kinds of institutional, the way that it was founded, if we could change that, you would definitely get more people who would be interested in participating. If you're going to choose something that doesn't pay necessarily a living wage and say, I'm going to stop everything else I'm going to do because I need to come to this meeting once every other Wednesday, Monday, or whatnot, compared to, I do want to be a part of what's going on. How can I do that? And unless they do it in the evening, I can't participate, and I think that the structure needs to change.
Can I just add to that and say I totally agree with what Pam's saying, but when I did throw my hat in the ring and said that I wanted to run, I was met with, well, how can you possibly do that? You have little kids. And we don't do that to men. We don't ask them who's going to take care of their kids. So I agree with Pam that we need to change the structure. But I also think that that plays into the whole, you know, we can't do it because we have other obligations.
Well, thank you very much.
So we're going to open it up for questions now. We have 2 microphones, and so if you have a question, raise your hand. Okay, one down here, and then one up there. So we'll go second. So please just wait till the microphone gets to you to ask a question. Thank you.
So I want to ask Carroll, I think, first, and then the others. Don't you think that the reason why there's more women that ran this time is that they had a protagonist? They had a cause.
Yes.
And I think it goes to what Joanie was saying as well. They they couldn't say, I can't do this anymore. So I think there needs to, because when you had the Obama administration, when people were looking for people that looked like them and they wanted to get out and help, but they needed a cause. And Me Too movement is part of that same thing, too.
I agree with that. You know, one of the findings of research on women in politics is that, and one of the things that we've seen over the years at the Center for American Women in Politics as we've dealt with political women across the country, is that, and the stories they tell, is that they tend to get involved in politics because of their passion around an issue, or there's something that motivates them. That, you know, it can be as small as like needing to have a stop sign on the corner so their kids aren't endangered walking to school, or it can be something like, you know, what we saw with the presidential election and the election of someone that you strongly, adamantly, you know, disagree with for different reasons. So there are lots of different motivations, but for women at least, it seems like the motivation is usually has to do with something I would call a passion, often around an issue, but it certainly in this case was motivated by, you know, the election of a presidential candidate.
Versus men who are motivated by what?
More by personal ambition, more by wanting to be. And one of the Anna Eshoo, I'm paraphrasing her, from California said, that basically, women come to Congress because they want to change things, they want to solve problems. Men more often come to Congress because they want to be somebody.
Yeah. I think that you don't have to go to Congress to see that.
Well, I'm just saying that was her. I'm sort of misstating the quote,
No,
but it
but
was something
I know
along those
exactly what
lines.
you mean. We want to do it, they want to be it.
Yeah, so it's
Right.
more, and this links, I think, to the fact that, you were talking about the Lawless and Fox research where women have less political ambition. That doesn't mean they won't run for office. Right. They may have less political ambition because political ambition is personal. It's about wanting to advance yourself, in a position or up the hierarchy or whatever. But those women, and this is what we argue, Kira Samamatsu and I argued in our earlier book called Poised to Run, which looked at the factors that affect recruitment. Women basically, they are poised to run. There just has to be something to get them to run. Yeah. So, it's not just about ambition. It's like if the passion grabs them, if something happens, if someone talks to them and encourages them, it is true that women need more encouragement to run for office. They need to be encouraged more often. And they do see themselves as less qualified even when they're more qualified. They'll have all kinds of credentials to run for office, and yet they're not sure if they're quite ready, which is why the encouragement is so important. But there are a lot of women out there who can run for office. So I don't think you have to sit around and wait for political ambition to happen. I think it just takes something to encouragement, and it takes or passion around a cause or an issue.
And I would only add to that discouragement can be a motivator.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
I got my job as a result of a temper tantrum.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get told all the reasons why you shouldn't do it. That can be a motivator also.
Yes.
We had a question up here, and then move the microphone down there. Thank you.
Yeah, so my question is for the panel, and picking up from both Mrs. Mahoney and can you hear me, some? And Mrs. Hunter mentioned about the conversation and how do we change the dynamics of the conversation to make it more interesting for the next generation who there's a disconnect in terms of politics and the interest and why should they get involved. I mean, my daughter here who's in high school, and how do we get them to that point of where it is an interesting conversation enough for them to cross that barrier to get involved?
We would probably both agree electing an independent in Ben Walsh as the mayor of the city of Syracuse is a giant step forward, because a lot of the partisan politics are what turn people off. But when people see they can get elected outside of that two-party system, I think it sends a message to maybe what I keep calling regular people. Those of us that didn't throw our hats in the ring are regular people. But I think that voting for the person and not the party, and being able to put some independent voices in there might make the conversation more interesting for people like your daughter.
If I can add something, there's an article in the Washington Post today by two political scientists who found that they interviewed adolescent girls and boys in 2016 and 2018, I think, and found one of the things they asked was, do you think, did you read this? Any of you read this? This is, it's kind of, do you think things are going in the country the right way, or are you really pissed off about it, kind of? And the people who were upset about it, particularly the young high school age girls, and if they were Democrats, they were really likely to say, I'm going to get involved. So in this case, having this issue, which is what you mentioned too, or this feeling that things were going wrong and they needed to jump in there, has particularly mobilized that group, or potentially is mobilizing that group of people. So not that you want bad things to happen to mobilize people necessarily, but this seems to be happening.
I guess I would bring it down to actually just even more grassroots personal level. I talk to lots of young people that I'm driven, to talk with them, because the decisions I make on an everyday basis is for them. It's not for me, it's for the future. And so when I talk to young people, I say, is clean air important to you? Is clean water important to you? Is student loan debt important to you?
Very.
Is owning a home important to you? And if any of those things are important, well, we make those decisions. We create laws that impact the future. And so if there be ever an issue, maybe it doesn't have to be an overall, I want to be involved. It could be a specific, I want to make sure we have clean air in the future. And that's a reason to jump in. And sometimes it goes through advocacy first and then, political office, and it doesn't have to be in that way. But I go right to the issues. What is important to you? Is education important to you? Is the environment important to you? Because something's important to everyone. Is technology important to you? Do you want to make sure that we have the most up-to-date technology, possible? Well, we make those decisions. So I think, having young people know that we're making decisions for you. If you don't like the decisions that we're making for you, you better get involved now, because you're the next generation. It's for you.
Good point.
So my question is, how unique the 2018 elections were. Maybe the same pattern will repeat itself for 2020, but just clearly, there is this anger that women feel. So part of that is this, Billy Bush tape effect or Trump effect, or how you might just call it. Because there are sort of structural issues, and I think Joanie Mahoney sort of mentioned this, that women generally are less interested in politics. Mm-hmm. And So we find this not only in the US, we just find it in, we find the same effect in other advanced sort of democracies, but they elect more women because this also just ties into another thing that you mentioned, that the primaries reward extreme people.
Yep.
And you tied this sort of together to say that women are put off by this sort of extreme thing. And so there's data to suggest that women don't like extreme things, but the uniqueness of 2018 sort of election was that women became the extreme position, right? That, you know, in a sense, for Democrats, a female candidate was more trustworthy because there's also Me Too movement, you know, just all the things are happening. And suddenly there's a situation where you go to primaries and, well, a woman, you can believe this woman to be a stronger, more extreme voice against the status quo. And I think that's why we're just seeing a lot more female presidential candidates too. So my question is, like, how long will this effect last while the structural aspects of the American politics are not changing? So I just want to sort of hear you just comment on this.
Well, I thought that was a great question, but I would defer to the expert over here.
Oh, I was afraid of that.
Are there cycles that we should be?
Well, you know, I think it's too early to tell. You know, I just don't know the answer to the question because it may well be that we're experiencing a sea change and that these women have now gone in and, you know, and they'll motivate other women and things will keep building. On the other hand, we may just go back. So I'm hoping that at a minimum this is a new normal. You know, that we've got more women in office now, so our baseline has gone up. And we're at least able to maintain that baseline and build on it moving forward. You know, we're probably not going to have something like, you know, something quite as motivating as what we saw in following the 2016 election. And you're right about all the structural problems that still remain. I mean, none of that has changed. You know, so that's all in the background. But you know, to me, the verdict's just out. We'll just have to stay tuned. We will see.
Although I would say that some of the structural things may change, you know, with more resistance to gerrymandering, which is what you were arguing, and, you know, trying to create better districts and to encourage people to vote rather than suppress voting and so on and so forth. So
Slowly.
That's an optimistic.
I'd just like to add, you know, it's interesting because since the election in November and, you know, kind of switching my hat because I am the chair of the Democratic Party in Onondaga County, you know, I have seen, and you know, it's anecdotal, I'm not a statistician, but I've seen just even the drop in social media has gone down since after we got the House, we could take a breath. Because people have been fighting for like a year and a half. And so I feel like that there's a way in which people are like, okay, let me just get a little room to breathe here. And that is slightly concerning because obviously we have local elections, you know, this year in 2019 where we could, you know, we have a huge amount of women who are running and we need to be cognizant of that, but we're not focusing on today and now and issues and that relate to people locally. Who's going to be the next president? We're already talking about 2020 when we have, you know, things that are relating to now. So it's a little concerning. I was with a consultant earlier today and I asked just, you know, kind of what happened in that public advocate race that happened in New York City. Obviously they had a public advocate race in New York City. What was the voter turnout? Well, super special election. And we're talking about a city that has 9 million people, 10 million people, 8%.
That is concerning.
Yeah.
I'll just confess that I'm a man in local politics before I ask my question. But
We'll allow it.
Joanie made reference to being in the fight. And as a man, I mean, politics is a fight, right? At the end of the day, even for these local positions, there's the political part of it can turn into a fight, and one person wins and one person loses, and there can be like, anyways, my question, that part seems the most uncomfortable. As a man who's like recruited female candidates, and the part that seems most uncomfortable is the fight So when's the first time you politically got punched in the face? How did you react? And when was the first time you politically threw a punch? And what did you do?
That is a very good question, and I have experts here. I don't know. Travis ran my campaign in 2005. I don't think I took punches and threw punches very much in that. I would say that, oh, look at him, he's like, man, she did. The one that stands out to me really was the 2007 race when I said that I was interested in running for county executive. That was really the big thing that I did that was so horrible, was express interest in perhaps pursuing this. And it was just a really fierce negative response to that. And I don't think that I've ever, or I don't know that I was really punched in the face, but I also don't think it ever ended. I sort of think that was my new normal. But I would also say that I was guilty of the same thing, you know, like, but for me, it was when I lost my patience with people needing to not, you know, like if you need to edit the facts to get people on your side, then you really need to consider what you're doing for a living here, you know? Just if you're straight with people, give them all the facts. If you're confident in the position that you're taking, then you should want everybody to know what you know and believe that they will come around to where you are. But when you find yourself in a battle, and you know, it happened for me here locally, that SIDA-OSIDA thing, and now I'm getting way into the weeds for people who don't pay attention, but it was like we were fighting against the you know, like we just wanted the facts. And at some point, I feel like I started punching, you know, and it was just like, I just have had enough of the, you know, the gamesmanship, you know. But it is a battle. It doesn't really need to be, though. I kind of got a vibe from you when he said that about a fight. It doesn't really probably need to be a fight, but inevitably.
There are fight aspects or competition always, but yes, you can make that less important a part of things.
To downplay the fight aspect, just like, okay, I want to get elected, I'm going to knock 1,000 doors. There are way more men who are like, oh, I will go knock crazy, spend time away from my family than women, right? So women will say, I don't know, in my experience, like that element of it, to like demonstrate full commitment to this job is probably worse than the job you already have. You know,
Yeah,
like,
I knocked on 4,000 doors, and people thought I was crazy, but I kind of was crazy. I really wanted to.
It sounds like grassland.
Thank you all for being here today. So my question sort of goes back to the 2020 candidates so far and the women that we're seeing, and Amy Klobuchar announcing her candidacy a few weeks ago, and sort of the media attacks that came out afterwards, or the media publicity about her being an aggressive boss. So my question is really difficult. So my question is, how far do women candidates still have to come in the media realm in terms of their temperament, and what role does that play in them getting into office in the first place?
I think it's a lot, quite frankly, and you know, while we love the media, you know, I feel like they do a disservice, quite frankly. I think that, you know, we've seen in several instances just in the past week where we jump to conclusions when we just hear a snippet, and unfortunately, people listen to 30 seconds worth of the news and they jump on and they post on Instagram and Facebook, and this person said something, and we're very hesitant to kind of look at all of the facts, and now she has to come out and have all of her staffers say, no, she's a great person, and you shouldn't have to do that. I think that we are too quick to rush to judgment, you know, quite frankly, and we do get judged. I mean, I can say the universal we, but I can say, you know, personally, people, you're being too aggressive, you're being too sensitive, you're being too dramatic, you're being too this. And if I would say that about a man, they would never be like that. Well, they're worse in some cases, you know, quite frankly. But I think that we need to hold the media accountable relative to things like that, because it's unfair, because then already that's the narrative, that we have already had that narrative out there in the universe, that there's already an issue, and she's already, you know, being spicy with her, you know, with her staff, but how's she going to be with, the rest of the universe? And that's not fair. It's just not fair, and we should push back on that.
Yeah, I agree.
Eat salad with a comb. How could we elect anyone?
But the media is a big part of the problem. I mean, they love it if we start fighting. They just love it. They, pour gasoline on it, and it's not helpful.
Yeah, I was wondering if one of the barriers for women running is the increasing costs of campaigns raising money. I mean, I personally just the idea of calling people and asking them for money just is really not attractive. And I don't know if that's gendered or not, but I wonder. And it also makes me think about something Margarita said is kind of when women do get some power, it feels like one of the goals should be to change some of those rules so that they no longer serve as such barriers going forward. So that our agenda should include policies that kind of start to change those structures. Otherwise, we're just spinning our wheels and we go up and down, and it's just based on who's the crazy man in the White House, right? I don't want that to be the reason why there's more women, is because there's a crazy person in the White House. Because hopefully there won't always be a crazy person in the White House.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I don't really know that it's on the agendas of this new freshman class of women to change things like gerrymandering and
Sure, it
the
is
structure.
of the Democrats, yeah, and public financing potentially, yeah.
I think one of the things, obviously as a person who has to raise money, it's almost like you have to switch your hat around and get yourself together as you pick up the phone and, you're getting ready to make that call. It was like, what are you raising money for? And a reporter asked me one day, what is all this money for? What do you need all this money for? I'm like, well, those nice glossy postcards that come to your house, they cost a lot of money. And those wonderful commercials everyone sees on TV, those are super expensive. They're like Super Bowl priced commercials. And it's unfortunate because that's how modern day campaigns are now. It's literature at your mailbox every other day. So you're like, I walk straight from my mailbox right to the recycling bin. And it doesn't even get to the house. And that's exactly, thousands of dollars that it costs. But I find that, for the folks who can't raise maybe as much as others, and we've seen that especially in the Westchester County exec race where, the Republican had $1.5 million more dollars than the Democrat, it was boots on the ground that won that race. And I think that foot power, if you're not wearing your shoes out, if you're not exhausted by the time you go home every night, then you're not working hard enough. I think quite honestly that you can combat some of that costly things like TV and print if you have a mechanism to get out there and knock on a bunch of doors and see as many people as possible.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions, and we're going to start over there, and then we'll end with you. Okay.
Hello. What advice would you have for women going into politics or even just the workforce that is unique to any advice that you would have for men going into the workforce or politics?
Go ahead.
You want to start? What advice, you're asking what advice would we have that would be unique for women and not the advice we would give men? Be nice, comb your hair, wear a dress. That is tough. What advice would I give? I would just, well, first of all, my advice would be to please get involved in politics. And I would say it's not all bad. We've kind of been focusing on some of the issues, but there's something really rewarding about being out in your community and somebody saying they are having some issue with something that is like bureaucratic and a morass, and like you can solve it for them. I'm sure Pam and I and others in this room have been approached by people whose family members are suffering from the opioid addiction. You're in a position to actually help people, and it is really rewarding. So I would encourage people to do it. But as far as women, just stand your ground, and encourage your friends to get involved. There are a lot of good guys in the world, and even some of the good guys, and I have a couple of them that I'm thinking of, you know. But I mean, they just don't have the same perspective that we have, so there's real value in having women's voices.
I would say, and universally, I guess I would, tell anybody this, but, for women candidates, I would say you need to read and be prepared, because there have been many times I've been in the room and people would say to me, gosh, you really know what you're talking about. I'm like, the information is right there in front of you. And most people won't read the information that's presented to them. And I would say that is right there. You'll be, at the top of the list if you read. What you need is out there for you. And, sometimes people feel uncomfortable, women feel uncomfortable, we don't know enough. But let me tell you, in a room, if you read and you be prepared, and you're sitting there at committee and people are kind of flipping through and they don't really know, and you start asking questions and all of a sudden they're sitting up, the ties, they're adjusting, all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, she's asking real legitimate questions. Be prepared.
Good advice. Good advice. Good advice.
I know many women who are involved in community action. I'm a community activist myself, and a lot of people who want to get things done are working on climate change or local education and issues like that. But I think there are two obstacles to running for office for many women. One of them we finally touched on, raising money. Women who want to solve problems don't necessarily want to go out and raise money. That's a distraction. The second one, I think, is social or cultural. Men are ambitious, women are pushy. It's a perception in our society, and a lot of women who may want to solve problems don't necessarily want to get into politics, for that reason. So I wondered about your experience, especially about the social and cultural aspect of being a woman running for office.
You're the town councilor. Do you want to answer?
I would say that you need to make it a team effort, and you need to have people who are, it's not real expensive to run for town board in Cazenovia, but the first time that a bunch of us did it, it was several people, and we had the backing of other people, so I never felt like it was just me asking for money for me. It was us trying to get enough money for this little campaign. And so it's having a team of people. At the national level, women are now equally able to raise funds as men. For Democratic women, Emily's list has been particularly important, and I think that's true, right? That
yeah, it's a great equalizer.
that women have ceased to have a disadvantage if they're running for Congress, just taken as a whole.
We're not trained in self-promotion.
That's absolutely correct, yes.
I think that's a barrier.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
I agree. And, if you asked me 20 years ago, would I like to read articles in the paper that I'm, pushy, to use your word? No. But, it does come with the territory, and I agree with you that it's probably a barrier for a lot of people. But there is a lot about being involved, and as Pam said, do you want clean water? Do you want clean air? Education. There's something really rewarding about having a voice. So you kind of have to take the good with the bad until things change.
This is something I've actually learned from my students, which is embrace the pejorative in a sense. So would I say, yes. So get yourself a bunch of T-shirts that say pushy broad for Congress or for whatever. And, that's what the younger folks would do.
Yeah.
And just, don't let them use it against you, but take it and revalue it.
What
Try
about the alternative of working on community issues without running for office?
Yeah.
Seems to me there's a role here.
It's a very important role. You need the inside and you need the outside. And women can be much more effective on the inside if they have people on the outside who are holding them accountable and pushing them to do things. And people on the outside really can't bring about change without the people on the inside. You need allies across that barrier of the inside and the outside.
You had said something, I just wanted to just add, you had said something about, culturally, and I think, just to add, I have been at several times, and I think that goes by stereotypes where you're just being an angry black woman. Well, I am angry, and I got a lot of things to be angry about. And it's like, if that makes you uncomfortable, that means there's something for us to talk about. And I think that always leaves room. If you're not uncomfortable with me being angry and black, then that's a whole different other problem. So I think that you have to embrace that stereotype. But I definitely thank you for your service, in the community, because there are far more community activists and citizens who have their boots on the ground, who are helping, and you lift me up. You lift us up, because without the work that you're doing and a lot of the other advocates that are doing, you're the ones who are knocking on our doors and saying, don't forget about this. Yeah. You remind us of what's important, so thank you. You do all the time.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask everyone to continue these wonderful conversations at our reception, and join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you.